Shalom everyone. B'ezrat Hashem, we're continuing today in Masechet Sanhedrin with Dalid Amud Bet 4b, and we're going to begin at Rabbi Yehuda ben Ro'etz, which is the fourth line on the page in Dalid Amud Bet. B'ezrat Hashem, our learning today should be as a refuah shleima, a quick recovery for Yaakov ben Dina. Now, Chaver, let's remember where we're up to. We're going to have two sections today. The first is actually going to be a conclusion of the answer we left off with yesterday in explaining the Machloket Rebbe and the Rabbanan, which was the third attempted answer to understand their debate. We'll continue and explain each of the Tanaim that were listed, of the total of 5, that they fit within that Shita. The Gemara will ultimately refute this in the second section and give another final 2 attempted answers, with the 5th one finally being an accepted answer for how we could understand the Machloket Rebbe and the Rabbanan, as well as these other Machloktim that we've had so far. Okay, so important to get the brief background before we begin here, because we're kind of in the middle of a sugya. We had a Machloket earlier on a Braita, which was on Gimel Amud Bet, regarding how many judges are necessary to adjudicate monetary cases. The Rabbanan said you need 3 judges, and Rebbe said you need 5. So the Gemara tried to explain what the Machloket was dependent on. It said one explanation, but it refuted that. We're not going to get back into that right now. And then it said a second explanation, which was supported by Rabbi Yitzchak bar Yosef, is that there is a fundamental Machloket between Rebbe and the Rabbanan, which is a Shas Machloket, if we hold Yesh Em Lemikra or Yesh Em Lemesoret, which means that the word Yarshi'un in the Pasuk, as it talks about the judges for monetary cases, could either be understood plural or singular. If you follow Mikra, the way it's Yesh Em Lemikra, that the expounding of words in the Torah are to be expounded, understood based on how they're read, so Yarshi'un is plural, Elohim will be plural, and since it's twice, so it'll mean 4, which means a total of 5, which is Rebbe's position. However, the Rabbanan disagreed and said, since it's written chaser, it's written without a vav between the ayin and the nun, so it's as if it's written yarshi'an, which is singular, Elohim is 1, Elohim is 2, which means you can't have a total of 2, so you have a total of 3 because you can't have an even court. And this was the first, or the second explanation of this debate, which we discussed more yesterday, that Rabbi Yitzchak bar Yosef supported by showing 4 other arguments, or 4 other sources in Shas, that we find Tanaim that also hold of the position of Yesh Em Lemikra. So there is a Machloket, according to this answer, in Shas, if we hold Yesh Em Lemikra, Yesh Em Lemesoret. And Rabbi Yitzchak bar Yosef went through 4 more examples of Tanaim who hold Yesh Em Lemikra to support Rebbe's position here. Beautiful. However, we left off at the bottom of Daled Amud Aleph, turning to Daled Amud Bet yesterday, is that Rav Acha bar Yaakov refuted this approach, because this approach would seem to imply that this idea of Yesh Em Lemikra and Yesh Em Lemesoret is a machloket across the board, but we know that that's not true, because then it would come out that the Shitot who hold Yesh Em Lemesoret, that the way we expound psukim, which would be, for example, the Rabbanan of Rebbe, or Beit Hillel versus Beit Shammai, as some of the machloktim that we had yesterday, would not know that there's a prohibition of cooking meat in milk. Now, why would that be? Because the Torah says, Lo tevashel gedi b'chalev imo. The way that we understand the verse is, you should not cook, Lo tevashel gedi, don't cook a kid, which is meat, b'chalev imo. So chalev is chalav, is milk. But if you follow the Masoret, so it's not necessarily that you need to follow the way it's actually read, which is milk. You could actually read it as chelev, which is fat. So maybe the Pasuk is only telling us there's a prohibition to cook meat in fat. And we know that that's not true. Everybody agrees to that drasha. So it would appear then that there is not such a capacity to say it's a general machloket of Yesh Em Lemikra Mesoret, because then how would the other shitot who say Mesoret know the prohibition of cooking meat in milk? So based on this question, the Gemara gave a third, which we started off with yesterday, a third way to explain the debate Rebbe and the Rabbanan, and we're going to continue today within this, and towards the top of Daled Amud Bet, to understand the other 4 arguments, the other 4 Tanaim that we quoted yesterday, which was that really everybody agrees Yesh Em Lemikra, and that's why we know it's chalav in the pasuk, because that's the way it's read. Even though it could be read, Masoret could imply that it's chalav, that it's fat. it's red, mikra is chalav, and therefore that's the way we know to read it. But now we have to go back to the original machloket, Rebbe and the Rabbanan. What's the point of debate? So we explained, even though everybody holds yesh emlu mikra, the machloket is, yarshiyun is for sure a plural terminology. The question is, how do you understand it in the context of the verse? So Rebbe says, like we said yesterday, Yarshiyun is plural, which means Elohim is plural. Since Elohim is plural, we compare it to the earlier one. The earlier one's also plural, which would give you a total of 4. Elohim plus Elohim, plural plus plural would be 4. You can't have an even court, male would have to be 5. But the Rabbanan say, no, that's not how you understand the pasuk. Yarshiyun is plural because it's saying one Elohim, which is the one right next to it, Yarshiyun Elohim, plus the other Elohim that we mentioned before, which is also singular, together equals 2. So 1 plus 1 equals Yarshiyun, as they shall indict, which is a plurality, and therefore it can be even, so it would have to be 3. But in this approach, what we're about to do now, which is the third attempt at understanding of this machloket, Rebbe and the Rabbanan, everyone agrees, Yesh Em L'Mikra, and as we're going to continue now, we're going to have to go through the 4 other debates that Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Yosef quoted yesterday, which seem to support the fact that some Tannaic might hold Yesh Em L'Mesoret. We're going to have to show everyone holds Mikra and then re-explain those arguments as we go through them. So we're going to begin again, the 4th line on Daled Amud Bet, Rabbi Yehuda ben Roetz. Now, let's just remember, the second Tana that Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Yosef quoted was Rabbi Yehuda ben Roetz. Now, he said, Rabbi Yehuda ben Roetz said that the pasuk, when it comes to a woman who gives birth to a girl, it says she's tme'ah for shivu'ayim. Now, shivu'ayim means for 2 weeks, for 14 days. But it's written without nikudot, and therefore the masoret means the way you could read it could be shiv'im. She should be tme'ah for 70 days. So the Gemara says, well, this doesn't contradict this new answer because nobody argues on him. Everybody agrees with him. So therefore, everyone agrees in this context, Yesh Em L'Mikra. You follow the way it's traditionally read, not the way that it could be written and therefore pronounced. So the Gemara says that doesn't challenge this at all. That actually fits very nicely. Continues the Gemara, Rabbi Yehuda ben Roetz, Lo Pligi Rabbanan Alei. The rabbis don't argue because they agree. Yesh Em L'Mikra, like we're saying now, is agreed upon by everybody. Okay, but that brings us to the third Tanaim, which was a machloket Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. And in this regard, we did seem to have a machloket if we follow Mesoret or Mikra. Let's remember, what was this machloket? So we had a debate regarding a Korban Chatat. We said, Korban Chatat was sprinkled on the outer altar, the outer Mizbeach, which was in the Azara, the courtyard. And it was sprinkled specifically on the top half, above the Chut HaSikra, above the red line. Now the pasuk there, as we understood initially, it says the word karnot 3 times. It says the word karnot 3 times. One of them is plural, 2 of them are singular. So the way we understood is as follows. There's a machloket Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. Even though lechatchila everybody agrees that the korban chatat, its blood needs to be sprinkled 4 times on the outer altar, on the mizbeach hachitzon, the outer mizbeach. How many could one be yotzei b'diavad if he did? So Beit Shammai said 2, and Beit Hillel said you could even be yotzei with 1. Now initially we understood this actually comes down to a fundamental machloket if you hold masoret, if yesh em l'masoret, which is the position of Beit Hillel, and therefore karnot, actually 1 is plural, 2 are singular, which only gives you a total of 4. You can't expound the first one. So therefore, the way we understood, gimel mitzvah v'achat la'akev, which means that come in, it's fine, come in. Which means that 3 of them would be on top of, hello?
Sorry, good morning. I'm looking for Suite 101. They told me to come around the building. This is my first time here.
I think you're in the wrong building. I think you have to go next door.
Go next door?
I think it's next door.
Because the number 975.
I don't think it's this building.
Okay then, thank you so much.
Be well. Sorry for the interruption. Let's continue. So the point is as follows, is that we had the pasuk karnot. That's what happens when you film in public. Karnot is written 3 times. Karnot, the first one is plural, and the second 2 are singular, is the way it's written at least. So we understood as follows. Beit Shammai was of the position that we follow Mikra. And since we follow Mikra, they're all read plural, so that would give you a total of 6. So the way Beit Shammai understood was 4 of them are lechatchila. You should sprinkle 4 times for the chatat lechatchila. And it's saying the remaining 2 is b'diavad. If you only sprinkle 2 times on the top half of the mizbeach, you'd be yotzei b'diavad. Now Beit Hillel understood Yeshem lemesoret. No, even though it's read that way, if you look at the verse, the last two karnot are written without a vav, which are singular, karnat. So therefore you have a total of 4. And the way they expound it is, lechatchila, you should actually have 4, but b'diavad, 1 would be sufficient. That was the machloket. But the problem is, the way we're explaining in this third understanding of the machloket is everybody agrees Yeshem lemikra. So the Gemara turns its attention now, how would Beit Hillel, assuming they held Yeshem lemikra, understand you only need 1 b'diavad, it would be sufficient to sprinkle 1 time on the mizbeach, the blood, in order to be yotzei. So the Gemara understands as follows. The Gemara explains, back in the Sugya. Beit Hillel de Tanya. Beit Hillel explained their position, even though they hold Yeshem Lemikra, based on the following Braita. It says in the Pasuk 3 times regarding the Chatat, V'kiper, v'chiper, v'chiper. It says, it shall be an atonement 3 times. So the Gemara says, Mipnei Hadin. This 3 times that it says V'chiper is going to teach us, according to Beit Hillel, even if you sprinkle the blood only 1 time on the Mizbeach for a Korban Chatat, you yotzei b'diavad. Now, we'll explain at the end of this conversation how we know it refers to 1 time. But the Gemara continues, the Braita says, the reason you need the psukim to teach us this, that 1 time is sufficient, because logically, you may have said that you'd be yotzei with 1 out of 4. Meaning to say is, as we're about to see, it's not going to be so straightforward. Meaning, there is going to be a logical debate if you should be yotzei with 1, or you should actually require 4. Based on that being a point of debate, we need these psukim, v'kiper, 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 to teach us that you're yotzei even 1 time sprinkling the korban chatat. What's the debate? So the Gemara, the Braita challenges and says, wait a second, I don't need psukim for that, because I'll show you logically, I would know naturally you only need 1. Why? Because v'halodinu, it's a kal v'chomer. I'll show you based on kal v'chomer, 1 should be sufficient. And if so, you shouldn't need psukim to tell me that you need 1. Because ne'emar damim lemata, we know that it says the word damim, bloods, when it comes to sprinkling below the chut hasikra, below the red line, which refers to other korbanot. We said yesterday, the olah, shlamim, those korbanot that are sprinkled, that the blood is sprinkled below the red line on the mizbeach. V'ne'emar damim lemala. And it also says the word blood when you sprinkle above for a korban chatat. And so you'll say the following logic, a simple comparison. Ma damim ha'amurim lemata, just as the bloods that are sprinkled below. Shenatnan b'matana achat kiper, as we learned yesterday. Regarding those, lechatchila, you need 2 applications. We said b'diavad, if you had 1 application, you're yotzei. So if you're comparing the bloods that are sprinkled below to those above, so you'll say logically, af damim ha'amurim lemala, also when you sprinkle the bloods above, which is referring to the korban chatat, shenatnan matana achat kiper, it should be sufficient even to have 1. So I shouldn't need the verses of kiper, 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 because logically, based on a comparison between the korbanot whose bloods are sprinkled below the red line and above the right line, it should be sufficient to have 1. So what do I need the psukim for? So the Gemara says, no, I'll show you why you need the psukim. Because you could argue on that logic. Or kalech l'derech zo, maybe you should go in this direction. Ne'emar damim bachutz. Now, as I've been saying all along, we know there's a mizbeach outside in the Azara, and there was also a mizbeach inside in the inner sanctum, in the inner sanctuary in the Beit HaMikdash. Now, there were certain chataot that their bloods were sprinkled. Korban chatat, their bloods were also sprinkled, unique ones. I think par helem davar shel tzibur, par of kohen gadol. There's specific ones, but their blood was sprinkled actually in the inner one, which was made out of gold. So the Gemara says, and what maybe you should compare the sprinkling of the bloods in the outer one to the sprinkling of the bloods of the chataot that are sprinkled on the inner one. Because ne'amar damim bachutz, it says bloods on the outer mizbeach. Ve'ne'amar damim bifnim, and it also says bloods on the inner mizbeach. Ma damim ha'amurim bifnim. Just as regarding the bloods that are sprinkled for chataot, for the korban chatat inside the Beit HaMikdash, chiser achat mimatanot. We know that the halacha is, if he was lacking even one of the 4, lo asav lo klum, you're not even yotzei b'diavad. So maybe you should compare in that direction and say, af damim ha'amurim bachutz, so too regarding the bloods that are mentioned outside, meaning the korban chatat that's sprinkled on the outer altar, maybe if you're lacking even 1, you're not yotzei. And from this we would say 1 should not be sufficient, but you should actually need all 4. So the Gemara says, now we have the Braita saying logic in both directions. Either we compare the sprinkling of the chataot that are done outside to the sprinkling of the korbanot that are done below on the lower half of the mizbeach. Since one is yotzei b'diavad in those, you should also be yotzei b'diavad with the sprinkling of the chataot above. Or we should compare them, says the Braita, the sprinkling of the chataot that are done outside the mizbeach hachitzon, the outer mizbeach, the outer altar, to the sprinkling of the bloods of the chatot that are done on the inner altar, which is mizbeach hazahav, where you need all four to be done to be yotzei, even b'diavad. So you have logic on both sides. Continues the Braita. So nir lemi domeh. Let's analyze which direction is more similar, more comparable. And the Braita says, Danin chutz michutz, it's more logical that we should compare the outside Mizbeach's korbanot to the outside Mizbeach's korbanot, i.e., one is sufficient, just as it's sufficient with sprinkling of the korbanot that are done below the red line. Ve'ein danin chutz mibifnim. And logically, don't compare the outer chataot to the inner chataot. So this seems to be a great logic, so as to say that you don't even need a pasuk to tell me one is sufficient, Beit Hillel, because logically you should be able to deduce that. But the Braita continues and says, or maybe you look at it the other way. Tanin chatat v'dalid karnot, mechatat v'arba karnot, that you should expound a chatat offering that requires lechatchila 4 applications of blood, and learn from another chatat offering that requires 4 applications. Meaning, compare the one that's done inside to the one that's done outside. Ve'al yochiach zeh, and don't deduce from the other types of korbanot that are sprinkled on the lower half of the outer mizbeach, she'ein chatat v'dalad karnot, which don't have the halacha. They're not a chatat, and you don't need 4 applications. You only need 2, like we spoke out before. So maybe then you should compare it in that direction and say, just as the inner chataot require 4 sprinklings, the outer ones should also, and you shouldn't be yotzei with 1. Therefore, says Beit Hillel, I need these 3 bechiper to teach me. Don't make the comparison in the wrong direction. Rather, even with 1 application, b'diavad, you would be yotzei. And what is that to tell us? Talmud lomar v'kiper v'kiper v'kiper. Because of the arguments, the logic that we've just deduced, we need these drashot to tell us that you could have 1 sprinkling with the korban chatat outside and you'd be yotzei b'diavad. Now, how is it to be understood? So the word v'kiper means atonement. What it's saying is, even if you lack a certain ideal element, you'll still be yotzei. And therefore, each of the 3 teach us, even if you're lacking one of the 4 that you should lechatchila require, you're still going to be yotzei. And that's how the Gemara explains it. Kiper, you'll be yotzei, you'll receive atonement, af al pi shelo natan ela shlosha, even if you only apply 3 sprinklings. The second kiper, af al pi shelo natan ela shtayim. You receive an atonement even if you had only 2 applications for the chatat. And finally, as it takes us to the final point, kiper, you'll be yotzei b'diavad. Again, you'll receive an atonement for the chatat, even if you only had 1 application of the blood. So really, it's expounded in a way of limiting the requirement to be yotzei. You're yotzei even if you only have 3 applications. Only 2, only 1. Thus, Beit Hillel say that we know from this that 1 application would be sufficient. But let's not forget the train of thought here. So what we've just shown in this 3rd attempted explanation of the Machloket Rebbe and Rabbanan is that everyone agrees, Yesh Em Lemikra. We expound the verses as they are read. It says karnot, 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 plural, so maybe you should need 2 applications like Beit Shammai to be yotzei b'diavad with a chatat. Says Beit Hillel, we have verses of kiper, 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 which imply to us that even if you have 1 application, you're yotzei b'diavad. But we agree, as we're saying now, because everyone holds yesh em lemikra. Let's move on now to the 4th Tanaim debate we had yesterday and explain how everyone holds within this position yesh em lemikra. So this was the machloket Rabbi Shimon and the Rabbanan. Rabbi Shimon and the Rabbanan debated how many walls does a sukkah need b'diavad for it to be considered a structure that you'd be yotzei the sukkah. Rabbi Shimon said it needs to be 3 plus a tefach, and the Rabbanan said it needs to be 2 walls plus a tefach. The way we understood it yesterday is this was a machloket because it says the word sukkot, sukkot, sukkot. It says it 3 times. The 2 times are written without a vav, and 1 time is written with a vav. So we understood that one of them you can't use because you don't expound the first word in a grouping of drashot. But then what it came down to was there was a halacha Moshe Sinai that says the last of the walls could be a tefach, and then the question was, is the word Sukkot that's written without a vav to be understood plural or not, which is a machloket yesh em lemikra mesoret. But now we're trying to explain everybody holds yesh em lemikra. So now we have to understand the position of the Rabbanan, how they would explain that even though we hold yesh em lemikra, you only need 2 and a tefach. So says the Gemara. The Rabbi Shimon, Rabbanan Ba'akamif Pligi, what are they arguing about? Rabbi Shimon, Savar Rabbi Shimon holds, Sechacha lo ba'ikra. He says like this. Really what happens is, you have 4 verses that are left for expounding. The way we're understanding, Yesh Em L'Mikra. You don't need to use one of those words, Sukkah, to teach us that you have a roof. The Schach. You don't need it for that. So since you have 4, and like we said, the Halacha Moshe Misinai limits the last one to being a tefach, therefore it's 3 and a tefach. Rabbanan Savri, but the Rabbanan disagree. Even though you should have 4, because Yesh Em L'Mikra, like we're saying now, you need to use one of those drashot for Schach. So therefore you're really only left with 3. 3, one is limited to being a tefach. Schacha ba'ikra, the Rabbanan say, you need to use one of those drashot for the number, but not for the number of walls. One of them has to be expounded for the schach, for the roof, and therefore you only have 3. One is diminished to a tefach, and therefore everybody agrees Yeshem L'Mikra. We've explained this machloket as well. Now, the final machloket we had yesterday, trying to show that there was a debate, Yeshem L'Mikra Mesoret, was Rabbi Akiva and the Rabbanan. This was regarding if the tum'ah of the blood of a dead body, is it only one dead body's blood when it's a revit alug, when it's a revit, a quarter of a alug, is that sufficient to convey tum'ah if it's from one body, or even if it's a combination of 2 different bodies, it would also convey tumat ohel. The tumah one can contract in an enclosure. Now the way we understood it yesterday was it says nafshot in the pasuk. Nafshot means, as Rabbi Akiva understands, plural, bodies. So bodies that give off blood, it could combine together and it can convey tumat ohel, if it's a revi'it. The Rabbanan said no, it's written without a vav, so it's nafshat, which is mesoret. So we have to understand now, how do the Rabbanan fit within this new understanding? Everyone agrees yesh em l'mikra. So the Gemara says Rabbi Akiva v'Rabbanan ba'apligi. Rabbi Akiva and the Rabbanan, this is what they debate. Rabbi Akiva savar nafshot tarti mashma. Rabbi Akiva holds the word nafshot implies 2 bodies. Simple reading. 2 bodies, which means if you have 2 bodies and they each produce a certain amount of blood, which joins together to be a revi'it, that would be sufficient if somebody was in the ohel, the enclosure with it, to become tameh. The Rabbanan don't disagree that it's a plural language, but they understand, they'll speak it out, they understand nafshot just means bodies, meaning a person who goes over bodies, it's talking about bahove, like in a general situation, he will become tameh. But it has to be a quarter of a lug from one body in order to be considered the capacity to convey tum'ah. It doesn't mean that 2 bodies convey tum'ah if they produce a revi'it of blood. Rabbanan Savri nafshot alma mashma. It means bodies in general. It's the Torah is talking like it talks, which is bodies in general. If they produce blood, so then they could convey tumah. But it has to be one body, and therefore, even though they hold yesh em l'mikra, they disagree with Rabbi Akiva in this context. Beautiful. Nafshot ba'alma mashma. Fine. Okay. So now, according to this answer, which is the third way we understand the debate Rabbi Akiva and Rabbanan, everybody agrees yesh em l'mikra, and we've explained all 5 machloktim, all 5 of the debates within that position of yesh em l'mikra. Now, the Gemara says this approach does not work. Let me just speak out why it doesn't work, because we're about to show, it appears at least, that there is clearly a Tana who holds yesh em l'masoret, because we've just eliminated that Tana. There is a Tana who holds that even if the verses are not read a certain way, we expound them as they're written and not read. So therefore, the Gemara is going to say it appears to be a machloket in general. You can't do away with that Tana because, as we'll see, there is such an author. Now, where is that found? So this is a discussion regarding tefillin. We know that a Jewish man wears tefillin on his head and on his arm. Tefillin sheberosh and tefillin shel yad. Now, the tefillin shel yad is one compartment that has 4 scrolls, 4 parchments that are put inside of it. But it's one compartment and 4 scrolls are put into that one compartment. The tefillin shel rosh, the tefillin that we put on our head, there's actually 4 separate compartments. Now, how do we know there's 4 separate compartments? So there is a halacha l'Moshe Sinai. There's a Torah Sheba'al Peh element to this. But the Tanaim in this Braita, as we're about to show verses in the psukim that imply that when it comes to tefillin shel rosh, the tefillin of the head, there has to be 4 separate compartments, one for each of the 4 scrolls that are put inside of it. And this is going to show us that there is a concept of yesh em l'mesoret. You can't do away with that Tana. So let's see. Asks the Gemara, are you telling me that everyone agrees you expound the verses as they're read and not written? Fahatanya, but the Braita teaches, we know it says regarding tefillin shel rosh, letotafot. It says in the pasuk, letotafot, letotafot, letotafot. Now, totafot means the tefillin, the sections of the tefillin. 2 times is written without a vav, even though it's read, plural, and 1 time is written, plural. Hare kan arba divrei Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Yishmael says this teaches us that there have to be 4 sections in the tefillin shel rosh. This is talking about tefillin shel rosh. Clearly, Rabbi Yishmael says since the 2 first times, even though they're read in a plural form, totafot, plural, nonetheless, since it's read totefet, which is singular, it means 1. 1 plus 1 plus 2 equals 4. Thus, you need 4 sections when it comes to tefillin shel rosh. But you see clearly he's expounding the verse as the Mesoret implies, not as it's actually read. Now let's finish the Braita. Rabbi Akiva Omer, Einot Tzarich. You don't actually need that drasha, because Rabbi Akiva says that if you take the word totafot and you break it up into 2 parts, the verse implies in foreign languages 4 sections. How do we know that? Because totafot is an acronym. It's tat and pat, as we'll see. Tat bekafti shtayim. Tat in the Kafti language, it's some foreign language, is 2. And pat, the second part of the word, ba'afriki, in Afriki, in some African dialect, is shtayim. It also means 2. So therefore, Rabbi Akiva says you don't need that drasha, but the point is, it means 4 sections just in the word itself. But the point we've just shown is this third answer is untenable, because you see clearly there is a Tanner, at least Rabbi Yishmael holds, you follow the Mesoret. Since it's written singular, even though it's read plural, you still follow the singular reading. So you can't tell me that there's no machloket if there's yesh em l'mesoret or mikras. There's clearly a Tana who holds yesh em l'mesoret. Ella, so the Gemara moves on now. We'll have 2 final answers. Le'olam pligi. So the Gemara is, okay, we reverse course. Let's go back. 4th answer is like the 2nd answer, which we had yesterday. Really, the machloket Rebbe and the Rabbanan is contingent on Yeshem lemikra, Yeshem lemesoret, and therefore Yarshiun is either Yarshiun plural or Yarshian singular, and that's why it'll either be 3 or 5 judges, like we learned yesterday. Le'olam pligi, and they have to argue. But now we're left with a problem, because we had the kasha on that was, it says Lo tevashel gidi b'chalev imo. If you say yesh em l'mesoret, so how do you know chalev is milk? Maybe it's chalev. It means fat, because you expound the verses not as they're read, but rather as they're written. So maybe there's no prohibition of cooking meat and milk. So the Gemara answers to resolve that issue. Vahani mili ki pligi, but they only argue in general in Shas. Yesh em l'mikra mesoret, heicha deshani krami mesoret. This is the yesod, at least for now, where the reading is different than the way it's written. So what does that mean? Meaning is that the word is written either in an anomaly way, either with a vav or without a vav. So for example, Yarshi'un, it's read plural. It's plural. Yarshi'un is plural, but it's not written with a vav. So there is clearly a distinction between the Kri and the Ktiv, the way it's written and the way it's read. Meaning the Kri, the Mikra, Yesh Em LeMikra would say then, okay, darshan the word as it's pronounced. Because even though it's written a certain way without a vav, we follow mikra. But then there's a Tana who says, we follow the Mesoret. And therefore, that's the Rabbanan who say, Yarshi'an is singular. Therefore, you'll deduce there's 3 judges necessary for monetary cases and not 5. That's where there will be a machloket. But that's where there's a distinction. But in a scenario like this, where it's chalev and chalev, it's written, both are the same. The the way it's written and read, chalev or chelev, it's the same thing. There's no extra vav or lacking of vav. There's no distinction. There's no anomaly in the verses. So then everybody agrees, yesh em lemikra, that we follow the way it's read, which in the context of the verse is bachalev, in the milk of its mother, not chelev. So therefore the Gemara has just corrected the potential issue in this. Really all of those debates that we mentioned yesterday could be contingent if you hold Yeshem Lemikra Mesoret. However, there's only a debate where there is some sort of an anomaly, where it's written Yarshi'un without a Vav, but it's pronounced Yarshi'un. So then you have a machloket how to darshan the pasuk. But in a scenario where the Kriya and the Ktiv is essentially the same, it's just the changing of the Nekudot, didn't need a Vav or lacking a Vav. So there we read it and we expound it as it's read, which is Chalav and not Chelev. However, continues the Gemara, this answer doesn't work either. So why doesn't it work? There is a pasuk when it comes to the mitzvah of Aliyah Regel. We know 3 times a year there is a mitzvah, at least for the males, to go up to the Beit HaMikdash and appear. It says Yera'eh, they shall appear in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now included in this mitzvah is appearing in the Beit HaMikdash and bringing a special olah, special korbanot associated with that. But the verse says, Pesach, Shavuot, Sukkot, you have to appear in the Beit HaMikdash, in front of Hashem. Now, the way it's actually pronounced, the mikra, the kri, is actually Yera'eh, like I just said. 3 pamim b'shana Yera'eh kol zechur echel pnei Adon Hashem. 3 times a year, Yera'eh. Every male shall appear. Yera'eh means every male shall appear. Okay, that's the way it's read traditionally. But the way it's written and can imply is Yir'eh. So when I appear in front of Hashem, Hashem is seeing me. But Yir'eh could also mean he sees, means the male who's going shall see, which means the male who's going shall see Hashem. And based on this, as we're about to show, there is an author, there is a Tana that we're about to show, who holds that we compare Hashem seeing and my seeing. But the point that we're bringing out from this is, even though there's no anomaly in the verse, it's the same way if it's Yera'eh or Yer'eh, we still expound the Mesoret. We still expound the way it's not pronounced, but the way actually we could read it, not the right pronunciation. So you see clearly, even if there's no anomaly, still you could darshan the Mesoret. And therefore it refutes this 4th answer. Let's read that inside. Says the Gemara, Vaharei, but behold, the Masechet Chagiga. The pasuk says, it could be read, Yir'eh, he shall see, means I see Hashem. And it's actually read, Yera'eh, which is I appear in front of Hashem, i.e. Hashem sees me. It's the same thing. There's no distinction in the way to read it, or that it's the way it's written. Upligi, and yet there is an author there who debates and argues that you follow the Masoret. Why? The Tanya, as the Braitan Masechet Chagiga explains to us, Yochanan ben Davai Omer Mishum Yehuda ben Tema Hasuma be'echad me'enav. If somebody's blind in one eye, Patzor min hareiyah, he is exempt from this mitzvah of going up to the Beit HaMikdash on Yom Tov. Why is he exempt from this mitzvah? If he's blind in one eye, it's Gzerat HaKatuv, the Pasuk teaches us this, Shene'emar, as the verse is understood, Yir'eh, Yera'eh. Now again, Yir'eh means I see Hashem, which means I appear in front of Hashem, he sees. Yera'eh means I appear in front of Hashem and Hashem sees me. So Yir'eh is I go to the Beit HaMikdash, I see Hashem. Yera'eh means I appear in front of Hashem and Hashem sees me. So we compare Hashem looking at me to me looking at Hashem. Kederech sheba lir'ot, just as Hashem comes to see me, and Hashem is perfect, he doesn't have a lacking in his eye that he can't see. Kach ba lir'ot, so too Hashem comes to be seen by man, meaning I come to see Hashem. Ma lir'ot b'shtei einav, just as Hashem comes with kaviyachol, whatever it means, 2 eyes, i.e. Hashem's perfect and he's not blind in an eye, and he comes to see me, af le'ra'ot, so too af le'ra'ot, so too Hashem comes to be seen, i.e. I see Hashem b'shtei einav, with 2 eyes. That means if a person, chas v'shalom, is blind in one eye, he would be exempt because he doesn't fit the bill as the psukim are laying out. But the point you see from this, says the Gemara, is that even though the Kriya and the Ktiv, the way it's read and the way it's written are the same, there still is a Tana who expounds the Masoret, in this case Yir'eh, not the way it's read, but the way it's written. So thus we've refuted the 4th attempted answer to say that the debate is only not in a scenario where they're the same pronunciation and read. pronunciation and written. So Ella, the Gemara accepts, and this is the final answer. The fifth way to understand is, again, really the debate is across the board, that there's always a machloket, if you follow the mikra or you follow the masoret. And that's even in a scenario where the masoret and the mikra is the same. There's no anomaly. And therefore, that's why you could expound the masoret. That Tana happens to expound the masoret, even if there's no anomaly. But this brings us back to our question. If that's true and you hold masoret, you follow the way it's written and not the way it's read. So the problem is, how do you know that there's a prohibition to cook meat and milk? Because bachalev could be understood as chelev. That's not the way it's pronounced, but maybe you should follow that masoret. So the answer, says the Gemara, Amar Kra, the pasuk says regarding this prohibition of cooking meat, it says, Lo tevashel gedi, it says, do not do bishul with the meat. Now what's bishul? In halacha, bishul is considered cooking in water or a similar liquid. And as the Gemara says, derech bishul asrat Torah. The Torah is only prohibiting something that is considered done in the way of bishul. Now, as Rashi explains here, what is the concept of bishul? Bishul is cooking a solid with a liquid, meaning a liquid. Bishul is cooking a liquid. So therefore, chalav is the way to read the pasuk. Why? Because if it really meant not to cook meat in fat, chelev, it would not have used the word bishul. Cooking in fat is called in the Torah tzli. It's called, as Rashi says, tagun. It's called frying. That's a different word that it would have used. So therefore, says the Gemara, even though there's a shita who holds across the board, yeshem l'masoret, that we follow the way it's written over the way it's pronounced when it comes to drashot, nonetheless, in this context, it can't refer to chelev, because then the verb that would have been used would have been frying, not the terminology of bishul, as the pasuk says. Therefore, it has to be chalav. That's how we know there's a prohibition of meat and milk cooking together and not fat. So therefore, we Baruch Hashem concluded the sugya, the bottom of Dalet Amud Bet, with a clear understanding that really the machloket Rebbe and the Rabbanan is a machloket if yeshem lemikra masoret. And therefore, do you read the word yarshi'un, which is plural, like Rebbe, which is the mikra, or yarshi'an, which is singular, like the Rabbanan, which is masoret, and that would create this machloket if you need 3 or 5 when it comes to monetary courts. And similarly, we could explain the other debates that we mentioned yesterday, the other 4 machloktim, that they could be contingent on this machloket too. If yeshem mikra, yeshem masoret. And we said the only time that the one who says masoret will agree to mikra is if clearly the psukim imply that based on the context, as we've shown an example by basar b'chalav. We're stopping the bottom of Dalet Amud Bet. Ezrat Hashem will start a new sugya tomorrow with Hey Amud Aleph. Everyone have a wonderful day.